Everyone, so while the Digital Foundry team has been taking a well-earned break over the holiday period, I've been working on some smaller scale projects and trying to tie up some loose ends. In the PlayStation 5 backwards compatibility video, I pointed out that two top-tier Sony first-party titles, Days Gone and Ghost of Tsushima, have been updated with support for PlayStation 5 hardware. I'm going to focus first on Tsushima here, a game that stands tall as the last of Sony's AAA first-party juggernauts from the PlayStation 4 era. Okay, so based on what I've seen in Tsushima and most recently in Cyberpunk 2077, it looks like Sony has introduced what you might call somewhat basic support for PlayStation 5 horsepower deployed within PlayStation 4 games. Patched titles appear to be aware that they're running on the new machine, and with that comes the facility to unlock frame rate while maintaining VSync. But the reason I put this video together is that it's clearly transformative. A game that ran at a maximum of 30 FPS on PS4 Pro now runs pretty much locked to 60 on PlayStation 5. So with that in mind, I think it's pretty clear that Ghost of Tsushima is a stunning game from the PS4 era, but in my opinion it reaches its zenith when played on PlayStation 5. So for my money, if you've got a PlayStation 5 but haven't played Tsushima, it's well worth a pickup. And if you have played the game on PS4 but didn't complete it, I'd urge you to go back and give it a whirl on the new console. You won't regret it. On top of that, I really wanted to give kudos to Sucker Punch and Sony for the Legends expansion, which essentially introduces co-op campaign and survival modes to the game, and you don't have to pay a penny to experience it. Suffice it to say that the 60 FPS enhancements are just as potent in these modes too. Okay, so let's go a little deeper here. I said that the PlayStation 5 upgrade is somewhat rudimentary, and here's a bit more of an explanation on what I mean there. Now, I might be wrong about this, but the 60 FPS boost comes across almost like a system level tweak as opposed to specific coding from Sucker Punch. The reason I say that is that if you go into the options menu, you're still getting the exact same graphics options as you do on PS4 Pro. That is to say, a high quality graphics mode that runs at a reconstructed 1800p and a performance mode that knocks back resolution to 1080p. For PlayStation 5, I'm pretty confident in saying there is absolutely no need whatsoever to engage the performance mode. There's no tangible benefit to it whatsoever. There's no need for it to be there. On PS4 Pro, the significant reduction in resolution essentially locked you to 30 frames per second throughout the entire game, but even so, it was a nuclear option of sorts to ensure absolutely consistent performance when the quality mode, well, it mostly hit the performance target with only minor dips into the high 20s. On PlayStation 5, 1080p mode is totally redundant because the 1800p quality mode essentially locks to full fat 60 frames per second. What you'll see here in these basic graphics comparisons is that beyond unlocking frame rate, PlayStation 5 essentially looks exactly the same as PlayStation 4. There's no improvement to anisotropic filtering quality, which clearly would have benefited the game quite substantially in some scenes. No improvement to resolution either. We're still at 1800p checkerboard, while based on the quality multipliers we've seen in Spider-Man Remastered versus the original game on PS4 Pro, I suspect that PlayStation 5 could have sustained 2160p, 4K for the duration. Level of detail, texture quality, it's all the same. So yeah, this is a pure performance increase, but a profound one. This performance head-to-head basically sums up the vast majority of play within Ghost of Tsushima when played on PS4 Pro up against PlayStation 5 in the quality mode. The Pro spends the vast majority of the duration running at its capped 30 frames per second performance target. When combined with the excellent motion blur, presentation's mostly solid, but as you've seen from the graphs, PlayStation 5 takes that 30 FPS cap, tosses it in the bin and brings the full force of PlayStation 5's back-compat horsepower to the action. It's important to stress that back-compat mode almost certainly does not grant the game the architectural advantages of the RDNA 2 architecture, but effectively you're getting 36 compute units running at 2.23 GHz versus the 911 MHz of PS4 Pro, a 2.45 times multiplier in graphics performance. This is backed by a 2.06 times multiplier in memory bandwidth too. And yeah, while there are boost clocks involved on the PS5 GPU hardware, my guess would be that full boost is given to the GPU while CPU frequencies drop back just a touch. There's simply no need to deploy power to max out CPU clocks when the Zen 2 architecture is just so much more potent than the Jaguars from the last gen era. What this means, if you haven't sussed it already, is that with the extra power of the PlayStation 5, Ghost of Tsushima doesn't just double the performance of PS4 Pro, it has the ability to go beyond that. There are moments in the game where PS4 Pro can't hit its 30 frames per second performance target, and what that inevitably means is a performance drop. Not exactly terrible, at around 26 to 27 frames per second at a minimum, and fleetingly so, but it is there. The fact that it is there at all is why I suspect Sucker Punch added a performance mode to begin with, but the PlayStation 5 rendition of the game does not require that compromise. I've noted a 2.2 to 2.3 times multiplier in performance during gameplay. Pretty impressive stuff. Is it perfect? Well, I'd say that it's just about there. In the initial battle scene, I noticed a solitary frame drop, essentially invisible to the human eye in the heat of the action. But on PS4 Pro, that drop is a bit more significant, and it's backed by general instability in frame rate in this segment of the game. Oh, one minor aside. Tsushima uses a combination of real-time and pre-rendered cinematics, so the real-time cutscenes will run at 60 frames per second on PS5, but as you can see here, pre-rendered stuff can only run at 30, just as it does on last-gen systems. Not a big deal, because pre-rendered cinematics are so rare within the experience, but you know, they are there. So that's the PlayStation 5 difference. A brutal level of extra horsepower deployed not only to iron out the small performance problems found on PS4 Pro, but to double frame rate, even in best case conditions. In terms of how much extra performance you get from PlayStation 5 over PS4 Pro, well, take a look at this. It's using the photo mode, and accelerating time of day seems to have a pretty tragic impact on performance, but this does give us an interesting look at scalability with nigh on equal loads between the two consoles here. Fascinating stuff. And if you're still on the base PlayStation 4, not the Pro, the performance multiplier will be even more profound, because the classic PlayStation 4 Amateur doesn't quite have the same overall consistency as the Pro version, and there's no lower resolution performance mode on the vanilla rendition of the game. So effectively you're getting two sets of upgrades if you're still using the classic PS4. You're getting the enhanced resolution of the Pro version and the 60 FPS unlock provided by PS5. So, if the PS5 upgrade is somewhat limited compared to the raft of enhancements delivered by, say, Gears 5 on Series X, well, pretty okay with that actually. I do think there's low-hanging fruit here that could have benefited PlayStation 5 without compromising 60 frames per second. Texture filtering, texture quality improvements, and probably a bunch more. Remember that developers had very little extra memory for 4K resolution on PS4 Pro. Memory bandwidth was also a profound issue that developers had to deal with, and all of that is solved on PlayStation 5. But on the flip side, I've noted that in some 60 FPS upgrades, motion blur gets tweaked or removed altogether by the developer, and that's not the case here for obvious reasons, and I think that works out pretty great actually. And what hasn't changed is the remarkable quality of the open world that Sucker Punch has crafted here. The island of Tsushima is vast, and owing to its sheer size, Sucker Punch delivers very different environmental types, from dense, rich forests to lush oceanside locations all the way up to an icy tundra of sorts in the north. Once you've played into the game and unlocked locations from across the island, using fast travel, it's fascinating to see just how much variety is in the overall game. Lighting is also tremendous. Sucker Punch uses a physically based rendering pipeline with much of the scene dynamically generated. Even so, the developer built in a certain amount of tweakability into the lighting, allowing the artists a degree of control, especially in terms of time of day and weather conditions. Yes, it's dynamic, and I dare say there's a certain degree of procedural generation built into the technology, but there's still the feeling of a handcrafted presentation in many of the areas. And just like John said in his original tech review, character modelling is also first class, even on incidental characters, while costume design and materials handling there is terrific. Sucker Punch delivered a SIGGRAPH presentation talking about the changes made to the materials pipeline that allowed for the accurate rendering of period-appropriate materials, including crushed velvet and silk. Fascinating stuff, and it all adds up to a brilliant presentation overall. Oh, and the Legends DLC. I played some of it and I loved it. Primarily it's built for multiplayer co-op and so it requires a PlayStation Plus subscription. But you can play it solo too without the subscription and it's still a terrific experience. You can think of the campaign missions as a sort of puzzle box if you like. New tasks are given for each stage and you can carry out those tasks as you see fit. There are even 4 different character classes to choose from to get the job done. Actual gameplay mechanics are much like the main game, but it all rolls out on a very different stage. For a start, you play as a literal ghost this time, and the whole scene seems to shift to an otherworldly plane. But just basically, it's a twist on the formula really. You've got the multiplayer co-op, you've got the survival mode, you've got a very different atmosphere. It just all hangs together really nicely. It's an excellent piece of downloadable content and it's absolutely free too. If you owned the game and you missed it, check it out. If you owned the game and you missed it and you've upgraded to PlayStation 5, then definitely give it a go because yup, the whole thing is locked at 60 frames per second there too. So wrapping up, from a technological basis, a somewhat limited upgrade, but a minimum of a doubling of performance is arguably the most profound upgrade you could possibly get. Tsushima does have its limitations beyond the 30 FPS cap, animation isn't quite state of the art, and there can be some inconsistency in the artwork, but it was the last great PlayStation 4 exclusive game from Sony, and it is a terrific one that's made even better on PlayStation 5. And that's it, that's the video. Please do like, subscribe and share if you enjoyed the work, and of course ring the bell for instant notifications whenever we post new content. And to enjoy this video at its best, please consider joining us on the DF Patreon. Not only are you supporting our work more directly, you're getting access to over 4 years of DF video content for download, plus the DF Discord where you can talk to other Patreon supporters and of course the DF team too. But that's all from me for now. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of this one if indeed you did, and just generally thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.